There was a flag on the bench that morning. Folded tight, edges tucked with care, it sat alone on the cold stone seat at the edge of Memorial Park. No name pinned to it. No flowers. Just the low rustle of wind moving through trees too old to remember how many names they had once shaded. Who left it there? And why did no one come to claim it? It wasn't the first time it had been left there, some said. But it felt like it might be the last. Not every hero gets a statue. Some just hope to be remembered once, by name. If that speaks to you, you're in the right place. Subscribe to American Quiet Courage. The town was still waking up. The early sun hadn't touched the marble of the war memorial yet, it only brushed the tops of the flagpoles and the rooftops beyond. Across the street, a diner clanged open its back door, and the smell of coffee drifted faintly across the square. But the bench remained undisturbed. A man in a worn jacket stepped out from behind the trees. Late 70s, maybe early 80s. He moved slow, not from pain, but from purpose. He looked at the flag but didn't pick it up. Instead, he sat beside it, folded his hands, and closed his eyes. No one greeted him. No one asked his name. And like every year before, he said nothing at all. He came every year, always before the crowd. Before the speeches, before the flags were raised and the rifles fired their solemn salute. George T. Rawlins would arrive quietly, take the same seat at the edge of the Memorial Park, and sit beside the folded flag that somehow always seemed to be there before him. No one ever saw him place it. No one ever saw him speak to anyone. He'd sit with his hands resting gently in his lap, fingers interlaced like he was holding something too fragile to name. Sometimes, he'd close his eyes. Sometimes, he just stared ahead, toward nothing in particular. But there was never a moment he looked lost. Only, still. By the time others arrived, he was part of the scene like the bench or the bronze statue that towered over the lawn. The older veterans noticed him, of course. They'd nod, respectfully, the way one soldier acknowledges another without needing a word. A few younger folks asked, once or twice, "Who is he?" But no one had an answer. The most anyone ever said was, "He comes every year." Linda Carr, who volunteered at the library and organized the town's Memorial Day bulletin board, had seen him 3 years in a row now. She'd always meant to ask his name. But when she passed him that morning, she just offered a polite "Good morning, sir." George didn't respond. Not out of rudeness, but with the kind of silence that says, some things are heavier than words. And so the morning moved forward around him, families unfolding lawn chairs, veterans straightening their collars, a child asking when the parade starts. But George just sat there, motionless, beside the folded flag. Like he was waiting for something that hadn't come last year. Or the year before that. The names on the stone were etched deep and proud. They wrapped around the base of the memorial like a solemn promise, each one carved with precision, with honor. You could see the care in the spacing, the symmetry, the small flags planted neatly below them. Mothers had brought their children to trace the letters. Veterans bowed their heads. No one rushed past those names. They stood still for them. Linda Carr stood in front of the monument, holding a clipboard and a small stack of programs for the ceremony. She was double-checking that everything lined up: dates, branches of service, spellings. It was part of her job each year, something she took seriously. Quietly. As she read down the list again, something stuck. She glanced toward the bench. George was still there, unmoving, just as he'd been all morning. Linda flipped through last year's programs. Then the year before that. She scanned the bronze once more, lips moving slightly as she counted. There was no George Rawlins. No Rawlins at all. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing, unsure whether she'd missed it. The names were grouped by war, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, and still, nothing. A man who came every year, who sat beside a flag that no one claimed, and yet, no record. No recognition. Not even a line. She looked around. Someone nearby might know. Someone must have seen him back then, during the war years. But the few older vets around were busy adjusting medals, sharing small talk in low tones. Linda didn't say anything. Not yet. She just stood in front of the monument a little longer, one hand resting gently on the stone, the other holding that clipboard closer to her chest. The sun had risen just high enough now to warm the top row of names. But his name wasn't there. Linda waited until most of the crowd had drifted toward the folding chairs. The music hadn't started yet. Just the low hum of conversation and the occasional snap of a flag shifting in the breeze. She crossed the grass slowly, holding the clipboard at her side, unsure if she should even say anything. But something in her chest wouldn't settle. George was still on the bench. Still beside the folded flag. His posture hadn't changed. But up close, Linda could see the quiet in his eyes. It wasn't the silence of someone who didn't want to talk. It was the kind of silence that had lasted years. She stopped a respectful distance away. Cleared her throat softly. "Sir, may I ask your name?" George looked at her. Not startled. Just aware. His eyes didn't narrow. He didn't frown. But he didn't answer either. Linda hesitated. Then tried again. "I help organize the memorial every year. I keep records. We have the names of everyone who served, everyone who fell. I didn't see yours." A long pause. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at the corners of a paper program someone had dropped nearby. George finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "There are others more worth naming." Linda blinked, caught off guard. "But if you served." He raised one hand gently, not to stop her, just to pause the moment. "That's not why I come," he said. "You don't need my name on a stone." Linda stood there, not knowing what else to say. George turned his gaze back to the monument. Not angry. Not bitter. Just certain. Like he had already made peace with a decision no one else understood. She nodded quietly, then stepped back. And for a moment, the sound of the breeze against the folded flag was the only thing left between them. The ceremony began like it always did. The mayor took the podium. The honor guard raised the flags. A boy from the local school played taps with trembling hands, and families stood shoulder to shoulder in folding chairs, clutching programs and photographs. Every name on the monument was read aloud, one by one, with a bell sounding after each. Linda stood near the back, behind the last row of chairs, still holding her clipboard, though there was nothing left to check. She hadn't told anyone about George. Not yet. But she had done one quiet thing. On the last page of the printed program, just beneath the schedule of events, there was a single line, centered and in small type. It read, "If you remember George T. Rawlins, say his name softly." Nothing more. No explanation. No title. No plea. At first, no one seemed to notice. The speeches moved forward. The band played a slow hymn. Children grew restless. But then, somewhere near the edge of the crowd, a voice spoke, barely audible. George Rawlins. A pause. Then, another voice. Older. Gravelly. George T. Rawlins. Then another. It wasn't loud. It didn't rise like a chant or fall like a cry. It moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass, low, uneven, full of memory. George didn't turn around. He didn't stand or react. But Linda, from where she stood, could see his shoulders shift, just slightly. Like a breath had settled in his chest for the first time all morning. And still, the whispers came. From veterans who had never met him. From a woman clutching a photo of her late husband. From a teenage boy too young to understand why he was saying the name, but saying it anyway. The mayor paused at the podium. She had just finished reading the final name on the list, letting the silence settle in before the bell rang one last time. But something shifted. A soft murmur had rippled through the crowd, subtle at first, but unmistakable now. Whispers. Dozens of them. And they weren't reciting names from the monument. She leaned slightly forward toward the microphone. Is something wrong? Nobody answered. But the whispering didn't stop. The mayor glanced down at her copy of the program. That same quiet line stared back at her from the bottom of the page. She hadn't noticed it before. She looked up, scanning the crowd. Her eyes landed on Linda Carr, standing in the back, still and focused. Then they moved to the bench. George Rawlins hadn't moved. The mayor stepped away from the mic and walked down the stone steps, heels clicking against concrete. A few members of the color guard exchanged uncertain glances. The audience remained seated, waiting. She stopped in front of Linda. Who is he? The mayor asked, voice low, not for the crowd. Linda spoke gently. George T. Rawlins. I don't have records on him. But he comes every year. Always alone. I asked once if he wanted his name added. He said, no. The mayor turned to face the bench. And for a long moment, she just stood there. No speech. No directive. Just the weight of a name she hadn't known, spoken by hundreds around her. Then, with quiet hands, she reached up and removed the pin from her jacket. A small silver eagle, part of her ceremonial insignia. She crossed the grass slowly. And laid it, without a word, beside the folded flag. The memorial lawn emptied slowly that afternoon. Families gathered their chairs. Veterans shook hands and shared quiet words. Children chased one another between the flagpoles, unaware of the weight that lingered in the air. But the bench remained occupied. George Rawlins still sat there, his shoulders square, his gaze steady. The silver pin from the mayor rested beside the folded flag, catching what little sunlight was left. Linda stayed behind as well. She didn't speak to him. Didn't ask again. Just stood a few steps away, hands clasped in front of her, watching the way the shadows stretched longer across the stone. By evening, the town workers began clearing the chairs. A few glanced toward the bench, but no one disturbed it. The next morning, a crew from the Parks Department returned early. And by mid-morning, a new addition had appeared, small, simple, placed just beneath the lowest row of names on the memorial wall. It wasn't engraved in bronze like the others. Just a single granite tile. No ceremony. No speeches. It read, George T. Rawlins. He came every year. Now we remember. There were no wreaths placed beside it. No crowd to applaud the gesture. But for those who walked past, it caught the eye. Subtle, quiet, undeniable. George didn't come that day. Or the day after. But the flag remained. Folded tight, resting gently on the bench. And someone, not the mayor, not Linda, no one who ever spoke of it, kept it there, just the same. No music played. No bell rang. But the name was there now. Carved in silence. And no longer forgotten. Another Memorial Day came. The chairs were set out again. The flags raised. The same solemn tune floated through the town square. But this year, something felt different even before the speeches began. The bench by the edge of the memorial lawn was empty. No one sat beside the folded flag. But the flag was there. Placed with care. Tight and centered, edges aligned. No note. No name. Linda Carr stood nearby, not with her clipboard this time, but with her hands in her coat pockets, her eyes on the bench. She didn't look around for him. She already knew. A few of the older veterans paused as they passed. One tipped his cap toward the seat, just briefly. Another touched the corner of the flag like it was sacred. No one spoke of George T. Rawlins, not in speeches, not in announcements. But when the names were read aloud, a moment of silence lingered just long enough before the final bell. Long enough for someone, maybe 2 or 3 people, to quietly whisper his name again. George T. Rawlins. And though no one marked who said it first or last, the sound carried gently across the lawn. Faint. Almost like the breeze itself had spoken. The stone tile at the base of the memorial remained unadorned. No flowers. No wreaths. But the words carved into it stayed sharp, untouched by time or weather. He came every year. Now we remember. The mayor didn't mention him. She just stood in the front row a little longer than the others. And when the ceremony ended, and people began folding their chairs, the wind rose softly through the trees. It brushed across the bench. Across the stone. And then, like always, it kept on moving. Some names are never carved in stone, but they live on in the quiet choices we make to remember. George T. Rawlins never asked to be honored. He came, year after year, not for recognition, but because duty, to him, never ended. And yet, when his name was finally spoken, first in a whisper, then in unity, it reminded a town, and perhaps all of us, that memory is an act of grace. Sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't found in medals or monuments, but in the way others carry your name forward even after you're gone. How many people in your life deserve to be remembered, but but have quietly faded into silence. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe in honoring those who never asked for attention, please like, share, and subscribe to American Quiet Courage. Because some stories only get told when someone finally whispers them aloud.